Ex-wife confronts ex-husband with a life-changing truth. Can they survive this final confrontation? Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's return to our main characters. The air was thick with tension as Claire stood at the doorstep of Mark's house. She hadn't seen him in over 3 years, and yet, her heart raced as if it had been only yesterday. The last time they had spoken, it was an argument, one of many that had led to their bitter divorce. Mark, once the love of her life, now felt like a stranger, a man she had fought so hard to forget. And yet, here she was, back at his door, about to confront him with a truth that could change both of their lives forever. She took a deep breath, her fingers nervously brushing against the envelope she held in her hand. It was a simple piece of paper, but what it contained was anything but simple. Claire had carried this secret for years, buried deep within her, but today, it had to come out. Today, Mark would know. With a shaky hand, she rang the doorbell. The sound echoed through the quiet morning, and soon Mark appeared at the door. His expression was a mix of surprise and caution, his brow furrowing as he looked at her. "Claire?" he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" His words stung more than she expected. She had spent so long rehearsing this moment in her mind, but now, standing in front of him, the weight of the truth felt unbearable. Claire swallowed hard, trying to steady her nerves. "I need to talk to you, Mark," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Mark stepped back, giving her space to enter. He didn't say anything, just motioned for her to come inside. As she walked past him, she couldn't help but notice how little had changed in the house. It still looked like it did when they were together, comfortable, familiar. But the comfort that once filled these walls had long since vanished. "What's this about Claire?" Mark asked, closing the door behind her. His tone was guarded, like he was preparing for a confrontation. Claire turned to face him, her hands shaking as she held the envelope out to him. "I've been holding on to this for years, Mark," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's time you knew the truth. The whole truth." Mark's eyes flickered with confusion as he took the envelope from her. "What is this? What's going on?" he asked, clearly thrown off by the seriousness in her tone. Claire didn't answer right away. She couldn't. Instead, she took a step back, letting him open the envelope. The truth was out now, and she couldn't take it back. The silence between them was deafening as Mark read the letter, his face slowly changing from confusion to shock, and finally to something that Claire couldn't quite read. She waited, holding her breath, not knowing what to expect. Would he understand? Would he be angry? The truth had been hidden for so long that she wasn't sure if they could ever move past it. But this was it. The moment of reckoning. Claire had no choice but to face whatever came next. Mark stood frozen for a moment, the letter still in his hands, its contents slowly sinking in. He blinked several times, as if trying to process what he had just read, but nothing seemed to make sense. Claire stood motionless, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She had known this moment would come, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure what would happen next. Mark's eyes flickered up to meet hers, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence between them. His face was pale, his jaw clenched tightly as if holding back a storm of emotions. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and shaky. "I don't understand," he said, his words coming out slowly. "Why didn't you tell me this before? Why now?" Claire took a deep breath, her throat tight. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind, but the words never came out the way she expected. "I couldn't, Mark," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know how to. And after everything I couldn't bring myself to tell you. But I couldn't live with the secret anymore." Mark shook his head, as if trying to clear his thoughts. He paced across the room, the tension in his body palpable. This changes everything. He muttered to himself, more to process the information than to speak to Claire. Claire's heart sank as she watched him, unsure if he was speaking to her or simply working through his own feelings. She had hoped for understanding, but now she wasn't so sure. She watched him closely, waiting for his reaction, but all he did was walk to the window and stare out at the quiet street outside. The minutes dragged on in uncomfortable silence, Claire fidgeting with her hands, wishing she could take back the moment, but knowing there was no turning back now. Finally, Mark turned to her, his face unreadable. "Why didn't you trust me?" he asked, his voice filled with a mixture of hurt and disbelief. The question hit Claire like a slap. She had never meant to betray him, but the years of hurt and confusion had built up a wall between them. "I didn't want to hurt you," she replied softly, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to keep this from you, but it was just too much. And I didn't think you'd understand." Mark looked at her for a long time, his expression softening just a little. He walked back to her slowly, his gaze never leaving her face. "I don't know what to say, Claire," he said, his voice now tinged with something else, something that felt like resignation. "I don't know how to process this. But we need to talk about it. We need to figure out where we go from here." Claire nodded, tears welling in her eyes. She had been holding on to this truth for so long, and now, finally, it was out in the open. But the weight of it was heavy, and the consequences were still unknown. She didn't know if they could survive this, if they could even move past it. But for the first time in a long time, Claire felt like she was no longer carrying the burden alone. The truth was finally out, but what came next was still uncertain. The room was thick with unspoken words, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air like a dense fog. Claire stood motionless, her hands still trembling from the nerves of the confession, and Mark was pacing once more, clearly struggling to process everything she had told him. He stopped near the window again, his back to her, staring out into the quiet street below as if the answer to everything could be found out there. Claire waited, but her patience was wearing thin. She had finally told him the truth, but now she was trapped in this limbo, unsure of where things would go from here. "Mark, please," Claire said, her voice soft but firm. "We can't keep going in circles like this. We need to talk about this, really talk about it. We need to figure out what this means for us." Mark didn't turn around, but she could hear the frustration in his voice as he spoke. "I know, Claire. I know we need to talk. But this is so much. It's like everything I thought I knew about us, everything I thought I understood, is suddenly in question." He turned to face her, his face contorted with confusion and pain. "How could you keep this from me for so long? Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me?" The question stung, and Claire felt a pang of guilt wash over her. She had never meant to hurt him, but now the weight of his words was crashing down on her. She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering the strength to answer. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said softly. "I thought by keeping it to myself, it would be easier for both of us. I thought if I just kept going, it would all eventually fade. But it didn't. And now I can't keep living with this secret." Mark's expression softened slightly, but the hurt was still there, lingering like a shadow. He took a few steps towards her, stopping just a few feet away. "You don't get it, Claire. This isn't just about the secret. It's about everything that came before, everything we went through. We've spent years apart, and now you come here, and suddenly we're supposed to pick up where we left off?" His voice cracked slightly, the raw emotion in it betraying the anger and hurt he was trying to hide. Claire felt her own heart ache at the sound of his voice. She had hoped for understanding, for a chance to make things right. But now she wasn't sure if they could ever move past this. "I know," she whispered. "I know it's complicated. But I'm here now, Mark. And I need you to know that I've never stopped caring about you. I know I made mistakes, and I know I can't change the past, but I want to try. If you'll let me." Mark didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at her, as if weighing her words carefully. For a long moment, Claire held her breath, praying for a sign, any sign that they could move forward. But all she saw was the exhaustion in his eyes, the years of emotional strain that had piled up between them. Finally, Mark spoke, his voice quiet and steady. "I don't know if I can do this, Claire. I don't know if I can go back to what we were. But I'm willing to try if you are." It wasn't a promise, but it was a start, and that was all Claire needed. A small flicker of hope ignited in her chest, the possibility of healing, of moving forward. It wouldn't be easy, and the road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like there was a chance for something better. They were both broken, but maybe, just maybe, they could start to fix what had been shattered. "I know it's not going to be easy," Mark said, his voice quieter than before, but still laced with uncertainty. "But if we're going to do this, we need to take it one step at a time. We can't just dive back into something without truly understanding what we're doing." Claire nodded, grateful for his honesty. It wasn't the affirmation she had hoped for, but it was real, and that meant everything. It meant there was still a chance, even if that chance was small. Mark motioned for her to sit on the couch. "We need to start with where we are now," he said, taking a seat across from her. "What happens next? How do we move forward from here?" Claire sat down, her hands resting in her lap as she tried to find the right words. She had spent so many years carrying this secret, hiding it from him, and now that it was out, she felt as though everything was suddenly up for discussion. She had never imagined they would be here, in this place of fragile uncertainty, but it was where they were, and there was no going back. "I don't have all the answers," she said softly. "I know this is a lot to process, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I'm here now, Mark. And I want to try. I want to figure out what comes next, no matter how long it takes." Mark looked at her with a thoughtful expression, his gaze softening. "I appreciate that, Claire. But this isn't just about us anymore. We've both changed. A lot has happened. And there are things we need to address, things we avoided for years." Claire's stomach tightened at the mention of the things they had avoided. The years of silence, the walls they had built between them, were not easily forgotten. But she couldn't ignore the glimmer of hope that had started to form inside her. "I know. And I'm willing to face it, whatever it is," she said, her voice steady. "I just need you to be honest with me. About everything. Because that's the only way we're going to move forward. I can't fix what happened in the past, but I can be here now. I can be present." Mark stood up, walking toward the window again, his hands stuffed in his pockets as he looked out. "It's not just about being present, Claire. It's about understanding what happened. What went wrong. Because I don't think we ever really dealt with that. We just let it go, thinking it would fix itself." Claire could feel the weight of his words, and for a moment, she wasn't sure how to respond. The truth was, she hadn't really wanted to deal with the past either. The pain of their marriage, the mistakes, the regrets, it was all too much to face. But now, there was no choice. "I know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can't keep pretending that things are fine when they're not. I made mistakes, Mark. And I want to fix them. I want to fix us." Mark turned to face her again, his eyes softening just a little. "This isn't going to be quick or easy," he said quietly. "But I'm willing to try. I'll be honest with you. I don't know if we can make it work, but I'll give it my best shot. We'll take it slow, one step at a time." A tear slipped down Claire's cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of relief. For the first time in so long, there was hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild what had been broken. It wouldn't be perfect. It wouldn't be easy. But they were going to try. And that was enough for now. The days that followed were a blur of quiet conversations and tentative steps forward. Mark and Claire both knew there was no quick fix to the years of distance between them, but they were both committed to trying, to taking those small steps toward healing. They spent hours talking, sometimes about the past, sometimes about the present, and occasionally about the future. It was hard, uncomfortable at times, but they kept at it. One evening, After a particularly long conversation that left them both emotionally drained, Claire sat on the couch, watching Mark as he cleaned up the dishes from dinner. She could see the change in him, the way his posture had softened over the last few days, the tension in his shoulders easing just a bit. It wasn't much, but it was something. He wasn't as guarded as he had been when she first arrived. He was beginning to let down his walls, piece by piece. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day," Claire said, her voice breaking the silence that had settled between them. Mark turned, glancing at her with a slight raise of his eyebrow. "Which part?" "About us," Claire replied, her gaze steady. "About taking it slow, being honest with each other. I've been thinking about that too. I know it's going to take time. I don't want to screw it up again." Mark set the plate he was drying down and walked over to where she was sitting. He sat beside her, his eyes soft but serious. "You don't have to worry about that. I'm not expecting perfection, Claire. I'm not expecting us to just pick up where we left off. But I want to try. And I want you to know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." His words, simple and honest, hit her harder than she expected. She had feared that he would pull away, that the weight of their past would be too much for either of them to bear. But here he was, offering her the very thing she had been longing for, a chance. Claire felt the knot in her chest loosen a little, and she gave him a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. Mark smiled back, his gaze never leaving hers. "We'll figure it out, Claire. One day at a time." As the days turned into weeks, Claire and Mark continued their slow, steady journey toward healing. There were still moments of doubt, times when the weight of the past threatened to pull them under, but there were also moments of light. Laughter that felt real. Small gestures of affection that reminded them of what they had once shared. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but they were both determined to try. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Claire felt a sense of hope. Hope that they could rebuild, piece by piece. Hope that, despite everything, there was still a chance for them. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but for the first time, she believed that they could face it together. It had been a few weeks since Claire and Mark had started their tentative journey towards healing. The conversations continued, and while there were moments of silence, they no longer felt as heavy as before. The truth was out in the open, and although it had brought pain, it had also begun to clear the air. The atmosphere in the house was still filled with uncertainty, but it was no longer suffocating. Claire felt a shift, a subtle change in the way they interacted. They weren't in a rush to fix everything, but they were working through things, one step at a time. One evening, Mark suggested they go for a walk. The weather had started to warm up, and the days were getting longer. Claire agreed, eager for a change of pace. As they walked down the quiet street, side by side, there was a sense of peace that had not been there before. It wasn't the same as it once had been, but it was something. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds being the soft rustling of leaves in the trees and the distant hum of a car engine. It felt normal in a way, almost like how it used to be when they would take walks together years ago. But Claire knew it wasn't the same. They weren't the same. And yet there was a part of her that felt hopeful, like maybe, just maybe, they could find a way back to something real. "You know," Mark said, breaking the silence, "I never thought I'd be here again. With you. Not like this." Claire looked over at him, noticing the faraway look in his eyes. He wasn't looking at her, but straight ahead, as if he were thinking about something far beyond the present moment. "I know," Claire replied quietly. "I didn't think I would be here either. But here we are." Mark nodded, his expression softening. "Yeah. Here we are." They continued walking, each lost in their thoughts, but still together. After a while, they reached the park at the end of the street. The sun was starting to set, casting a warm glow over the playground. They sat on a bench, either of them speaking for a few moments. It was a small, simple moment, but Claire felt it in her heart. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way through it. I've been thinking, Mark said, his voice breaking the silence again. About everything. About us. And I think we have a shot, Claire. A real shot at figuring this out. Claire turned to look at him, her heart lifting at his words. You really think so? She asked, her voice filled with hope. Mark smiled, a small but genuine smile. Yeah. I do. But it's going to take work. We're going to have to be patient with each other. And with ourselves. Claire nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. She knew this wasn't going to be easy. She knew it would take time. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of optimism. I'm willing to try, she said, her voice steady. I'm willing to take it one day at a time, just like you said. Mark reached over and took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. We'll get there, he said softly. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Claire believed him. They weren't there yet, but they were on their way. It wouldn't be perfect, but maybe that was okay. The journey ahead would be long, but they had taken the first step together. As the weeks passed, Claire and Mark settled into a routine, albeit one that felt unfamiliar but not unpleasant. They spent more time together, taking long walks, cooking meals, and occasionally having quiet evenings on the couch. There was a sense of calm between them now, though it was fragile, like glass that could shatter with the wrong word or action. Claire knew that the road ahead was still uncertain, but she could feel the change in their connection. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was something. One evening, after a quiet dinner, Mark sat down beside her on the couch. He looked at her for a moment before speaking, his voice a bit hesitant. Claire, he began, I've been thinking a lot about what we've been through. About everything we've talked about. And I know it's not going to be easy. But I think we're doing okay. Claire turned to face him, surprised by his words. She had been waiting for him to say something like this, but hearing it out loud made her feel a weight lift off her shoulders. You really think so? She asked, her voice soft. Mark smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. Yeah, I do. It's not going to be perfect, but we're trying. And that's what matters. Claire felt a wave of emotion rush over her, and for a moment, she wasn't sure if she should say anything at all. But the words came anyway. I'm glad, she said, her voice thick with feeling. I really am. I know we have a long way to go, but I'm glad we're doing this together. Mark reached out, taking her hand in his. The warmth of his touch was comforting, reassuring. Me too, he said quietly. They sat in silence for a while, both of them reflecting on how far they had come. It wasn't much, but it was something. They had both changed, both grown, and they were learning to navigate this new version of their relationship. It was different from before, but maybe that was a good thing. Claire thought about how things used to be, the way they had fallen into old patterns, the way they had taken each other for granted. They had both made mistakes, and they had both hurt each other, but they were learning to forgive, to move forward. And that was what mattered now. Mark squeezed her hand gently, breaking her thoughts. I know we're not there yet, he said, but I'm willing to keep trying. And I hope you are too. Claire smiled, her heart full. I am, she said, her voice steady. I'm ready. One day at a time. Mark nodded, his expression softening. One day at a time. It wasn't a promise of an easy future, but it was a promise to try, to be there for each other, no matter what. And for the first time in a long time, Claire believed that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to something beautiful, something worth fighting for. It wouldn't be easy, but as long as they had each other, there was hope. And that was enough to keep going. As the days turned into weeks, Claire and Mark continued to navigate their new reality together. They were learning to communicate better, to be more honest, and to take their time. While the pain of the past still lingered, there was a quiet sense of understanding between them now. It wasn't the same as it had been before, but it was a step in the right direction. One evening, Claire found herself sitting on the porch, looking out at the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, and the cool breeze brushed against her skin. Mark joined her a few moments later, sitting down beside her in silence. For a long time, neither of them said anything. The world seemed to slow down around them, and Claire felt a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. After a while, Mark spoke, his voice soft but steady. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about the future," he said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "About what we want. What we need." Claire turned to look at him, her heart skipping a beat. She had been thinking about the same things, but hearing him say it out loud made it all feel more real. "What do you think we need?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers. "I think we need to keep working on ourselves. Both of us. I think we need to continue being honest with each other. And I think we need to take it slow. Let things grow at their own pace." Claire nodded, her heart swelling with emotion. "I agree," she said softly. "I know we can't rush this. I don't want to rush it." They sat in silence for a few more moments, the weight of their words settling between them. For the first time in a long time, Claire felt certain of something. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that she wanted to be there, facing it with Mark. They weren't perfect, and they had a long way to go, but they were both committed to trying. And that was enough. "I'm glad we're doing this together," Claire said, her voice filled with sincerity. Mark smiled, the warmth in his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the sunset. "Me too, Claire. Me too." As they sat together, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Claire realized that while the past could never be erased, they were building something new. It wasn't easy, and it would take time, but they had each other. And that, in itself, was a victory. It wasn't about perfection. It was about growth, and the willingness to keep moving forward. Together. Months passed, and as the seasons shifted, so did Claire and Mark's relationship. What had started as tentative steps toward healing had transformed into something more solid, more grounded. They still faced challenges, but each day felt like a small victory. They had learned to communicate better, to be more patient with one another, and to understand that the past didn't have to define their future. It was a work in progress, but they were making progress nonetheless. One afternoon, Claire found herself sitting in the kitchen, a cup of coffee in hand, as she watched Mark prepare lunch. He was humming softly to himself, a sound she hadn't heard in years, and it made her smile. He had always been the one to bring warmth and lightness into their home, even when things were hard. Now, seeing him so relaxed, so at ease, was a reminder of how far they had come. Mark looked up and caught her gaze, his eyes softening as he gave her a small smile. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. Claire nodded, feeling a warmth in her chest. "I'm more than okay," she replied, her voice filled with sincerity. "I'm happy. I didn't think I'd ever feel like this again." Mark set the knife down and walked over to her, taking a seat beside her at the table. "I'm glad," he said quietly. "We've both been through a lot, but I think we're finally finding our way back to each other." Claire reached out, taking his hand in hers. "We are," she agreed. "And I know we still have a lot to work through, but I'm not scared anymore. I'm not scared of us." Mark squeezed her hand, his gaze steady. "Neither am I." The silence between them was comfortable now, not filled with uncertainty or tension, but with a quiet understanding. They didn't need to speak much. Their bond was stronger than that. As the afternoon sun filtered through the kitchen window, Claire realized just how much they had grown together. They had both made mistakes, but they were learning to forgive, to accept, and to build something new. Something real. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And in that moment, Claire knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. There would be ups and downs, of course, but as long as they kept working, kept trying, they could make it through anything. The road ahead wasn't clear, but it didn't have to be. What mattered was that they were walking it side by side, and that made all the difference. For the first time in a long time, Claire felt truly at peace. They had come so far, and while the journey was far from over, it was one they were ready to face together. And that was enough.